I have 77 acres. My partner has 70, which makes up Wildwood. This valley is shared by us, and it has some of the very, very oldest trees in this part of the island. I've been working here since, well, I came in '38 and started laying out for it then, and then the first cut was 1945. What you're looking at is a forest that's been logged 9 times by this type of operation. It becomes not a natural forest. This sort of operation becomes not a natural forest completely. It's a managed forest to some extent, but it tries to maintain as much of the natural environment as possible. In other words, what I try to do is work with nature, not against nature. One of the secrets of selection forestry, it's sustainable only if you don't exceed your growth rate. If you cut more than your growth rate, or you cut too much at one time, it's no longer sustainable. So you grow a certain amount of wood, you cut a certain amount of wood, and that's it. Well, the forestry course that I took back in the late 30s was given to me through the kindness of a man who had taught forestry in Sweden. And he had taught all aspects of forestry, not just forest economics and forest technology. In other words, he was as much interested in the forest remaining a forest as he was in the harvest from the forest, which allowed me to understand very clearly that you could have a forest with you all the time if you simply use some intelligence, common sense, don't overcut, and listen to nature. And that's the biggest thing. Listen to nature. A rule book doesn't do much for you. A forest is a family of trees, animals including man, birds, insects, invertebrates, bacteria, fungus, biosystems, microsystems. It's a whole unit that cannot be disturbed too drastically, or we lose the unit. We don't lose just one facet of it, we lose the unit. And then we are in an absolutely desolate situation. So a forest is like a big family of people that are all functioning. This stump here is from a tree that I cut in 1945. Now, when I cut it, there was a little tree alongside of it, like the little one that's there now, eh? Instead of cutting it down, like they do in a clear cut, or burning it, or destroying it, I let it grow. This is what I've got since 1945. Now, I could take that tree. It's big enough that I could take it, if I wanted to, as part of my next cut. I've got the next generation right there. In other words, there's been no loss in productivity on this piece of soil, eh? Continuous production means continuous jobs. Here's a classic example of what we know as a nurse log, eh? Where you clear cut, you lose jobs because of the loss of production in the growing of the new forest. You shut your forest down. A farm shut down doesn't produce anything. A store shut down doesn't sell any goods. A forest shut down doesn't produce any trees. And we're shutting them down.
Now, when I drove through here when they were doing the logging, and I asked the fellow what kind of logging they were doing, and he told me it was selective logging. And I said, well, that's very interesting because I consider what I'm doing selective. Because we were talking about the differences.
This can, because there's no proper definition in the forestry law as to what selection logging is all about.
Yeah.
There's nothing in our present act. This amount of brush and debris from the forest floor means that they have taken several hundred years of accumulated dust and organic matter off the forest floor.
Yeah.
and just piled it, and they propose to burn it. No doubt, eh?
This fall, yeah.
Yes. And in here you've got cords, and there's 100 cord perhaps of wood here.
Yeah.
Or, you know, several thousand feet of timber that has been sacrificed just to get logs of a certain size.
Yeah.
Now, most of that timber should never have been cut in the first place because it was too small, or it should have been cut the way you're cutting and taken out and made use of. They've just cut it and pushed it into a pile to get rid of it. And here's another classic example of a tree that would have been sacrificed in 1945 in a clear cut. Eh? This tree would have been cut out, burnt out, or wiped out one way or another. And because there's a 1945 stump, and this tree has grown since then. In other words, a continuous production. He's a pretty boy, isn't he? He has his fall colors now, eh? No, to go with the leaves. In the spring, he'll be green. Yeah. Well, let's use my lifetime as an example, eh? I'm 78 now. I started here when I was 21. Now, this forest has provided me with a major part of my income all those years. And it's still here, and it can go on doing it indefinitely. I won't last indefinitely, but somebody else can take over. And you have the forest behind you. You have something that's nice to look at, that's interesting to walk in, that the birds and the animals and all the insects and everybody else is happy in. And it's a very nice feeling. Now, I'm not the only one doing this. There are a lot of people doing it now, and more every year. And when I meet these people, all the way from California to the north end of this province, they're very solid people. They feel good about what they're doing. Not millionaires. They don't even want to be a millionaire. They just want a good living in a nice world. You can harvest the Christmas trees if you leave one limb, a good healthy limb, to come up. Again, it'll form another tree off the base. And leave it on the north side because it comes up that much quicker. Over here we have the cascara tree, or the barberry tree, and it produces cascara, which is a natural laxative, non-habit forming. I have had people that have harvested salal and sword ferns for the florists. People have hunted on the property, they fished, I've had tourists. All these aspects are applicable to this type of forestry. Yes, we have the mushrooms growing here. Now, there are literally dozens of varieties of these mushrooms, many of them edible. Let's take a look at our forest from the angle of what we can produce besides timber. And one of the first things and the most important places to start is with mushrooms, which are a high-priced product in a great deal of demand. And without the forest, you just do not have the mushrooms. The mushrooms disappear.
We have pickers that come in and pick here.
Right. Well, here's another product. We were just looking at mushrooms over here. I had a man from the Yukon the other day. They're running a check on a plot of timber up there on 1,000 acres. They're going to see whether the annual production of mushrooms on that it doesn't add up to more than the cut of timber that they'd get if they cut the 1,000 acres.
That's for sure.
And he feels reasonably confident the mushroom is going to win. You are harvesting what you grow. Therefore, you are going to harvest commercial timber. You're going to harvest poles, telephone poles, logs for building houses. You're going to harvest firewood, fence posts.
So it does about 2 cords an hour in small diameter wood. It hooks up easy to your power take off of a tractor. What we're trying to do here is give the mill a good product, probably 8-inch diameter and up. Right. And then the smaller diameters we're going to turn into firewood to utilize it right down to probably 3 inches. Or
well, because of the pricing system we have at the present time anyway, there's no point in, this would make pulpwood, eh? But there's no point in shipping it at the price they want to pay for it.
Hopefully with this system we're probably going to do maybe a packaging and firewood packaging system,
Yes.
and retailed in bags or.
This is something I noticed there is they're not using a unit like this, but down near Chemainus they are cutting and splitting alder and baling and shipping it to the United States.
Yes, yes.
Half-cord lots.
Yes, yes. There seems to be quite a demand for packaged firewood.
I would think
So,
even Vancouver would be.
Yeah, we're going to try and
yeah.
link up with one of the major chains. We've done some studies on it, and there was a market there for
Yes.
5,000 cords. This is second growth logs cut into lumber here on site, and I've got a sample here just to show you how nice and small the pin knots are and what grade of board you can get out of second growth. This is a 1x12 and there's a 2x4. I think on-site milling is going to be a good thing, a great thing.
Enhanced value in our forestry would mean that we would look at every piece of timber extracted from the forest for its best use. There is, even on this little bit of land, a potential for hardwoods for furniture making. But we just have not in this country developed enhanced value.
The recovery out of saw like this is incredible, and the amount you get out of a log too. The kerf of the blade, the amount of material that it takes out is so minimal that...
Well, it's only a 1/16 of an inch. Yeah, and the beauty of it is too is you don't have to have a 10 million board feet cut down to cut wood. You can do a dozen logs and get lots of wood out of it, you know.
I think the best thing is that you can haul it somewhere. You can take it right out to the site wherever logs happen to be. If an owner has cleared a site for a house or whatever and wants to use the materials in his own building, he can bring this mill right to his house.
The furniture, finishes, flooring, these are all examples of enhanced value. Carving, wood carvers, and so on. If you have wood good for carving, earmark it for the carver. Don't let it go to a pulp mill.
Primarily, I'm a designer builder, and I think there's more and more of a tendency to want to build with local material and to know that that material is produced in an ecologically sensible way. I think the kind of logging, for example, that Merv Wilkinson's been doing all these years has been really inspirational to me and to lots of other people. I'm working on quite small logs on an average. This is probably typical of the size of thing I work with. Often it's quite small. But the mill itself is capable of cutting 7'6" diameters. It's capable of cutting 26'6" in length.
Well, first off, Bill, there was no way could I sell that to a mill for anything except pulpwood, because of the size and the twists in the log. It would have been a pulp log. Now, you took 10 feet out of that log, and you turned it into some high-quality construction lumber.
Out of the whole log, I might recover a couple of $100 or $250 in lumber for construction grade stuff like siding and decking. But on the other hand, if I can high grade half a dozen clear boards out of the butt end, I make doors, windows, finished material. I've got it dried and stickered. Every dollar worth of material that goes into a house results in $1 to $2 worth of labor and value added through that process, whether it's house, furniture, cabinets, whatever I'm making. And not just the employment it immediately creates, but it creates a large equity for the owner of the house.
This property a few months ago was forests. You're still standing in the middle of a forest, but a house site has been created. The material taken off the site to create the site has been transformed to a house, which is, I'm sure, going to be a very, very livable building. No, this is really a marvelous piece of work showing the efficiency, because you must have in your mill, in order to do that off this area, you must have reached 65–70% utilization of your wood.
Well, you know,
and
here,
that's very, very high.
this pile you see right here,
right?
That's virtually everything that we didn't use out of this clearing. And what I used was way more than what any sawmill I know of would actually take and cut into lumber. I used all the lower grades, I used the smaller logs, I used the logs with specific defects like curves in them, whatever. And the end product, of course, when I'm cutting through that lumber, I handle each log carefully to get the best recovery, and when I'm cutting through the lumber, I handle each piece of lumber carefully to get the best recovery. My cedar logs, cedar is quite valuable now, and I don't think we can afford to throw it away like we've been in the past. Now, if you look at these stairs, the stringers and the steps, there's built-in benches here and here, there's a picnic table, there's an outdoor dining room, basically. And all that stuff is built with my mill slabs. Those slabs are what are left when I cut lumber out of the logs, and that's the small piece at the bottom that's held in by the dogs as I'm cutting lumber off the upper part. And taking those pieces and doing a little bit of carving and detail to them, I actually much prefer this set of steps to one that's made with 2x12s and 2x10s, you know. And actually, so do the people I'm building for. Now, the cost of doing that is really no different. But what it does is it utilizes these last pieces. These trees took a lot of years to grow. And this utilizes those last pieces in a way that not only does it require less wood to build the building, but this wood actually came from this land.
A diversity in the forest, of course, is a key point to having a balanced forest. By maintaining the forest, there is still room for all the species of animals, birds, insects, invertebrates, and so on, that you have in a normal forest. They can all survive in a sustainably, selectively logged forest. When I see the leaves falling on the deciduous trees in the fall, they're a thing of beauty before they fall, for one thing. They're providing cover when they're on the ground for the voles, for the wood mice and so on, that are busily scurrying around, carrying seeds around and burying them and forgetting them and helping to plant the forest. They provide cover for the squirrels who plant my trees to a large extent for me. As we come up here, you can see the result of a very heavy seeding year 2 years ago for the trees, And so you have literally hundreds of small trees here. Those trees are multi-species, and multi-species, multi-age forestry is the way to keep a healthy forest, because what will attack one tree in the way of a parasite or disease won't attack another species. With my slash, it remains in the woods, and it breaks down very, very quickly. By the time I make another cut, the slash from the previous cut is almost indistinguishable, except for the larger pieces, which take a longer period to break down, of course, but are also contributing to the forest's health. You can see where large pieces of timber have been on the ground for hundreds of years. Now they're gradually breaking down and feeding the soil, feeding the new forest. I'm aware that it's absolutely essential, and I've tried in my own way to say, keep clear of anything that I felt might disturb all the natural forces at work in the forest. This is a must, as far as I'm concerned, that we let nature evolve naturally, even to the rollover of our forests. That is a different species for a while. That's what we call a habitat tree. It provides flat areas, landings up there on which such things as ravens and hawks and so on nest. And there's an open limb up in there, it's visible from one angle further back, I think, that has a hole in the end, and that's the home of a wood duck. Nesting, for instance, I would never fall a tree if I knew there was a bird's nest in it. I try to avoid, that's one time of the period of the year, I try to avoid falling timber. These are things that you modify in your work pattern to work with nature. I think, if anything, the slightly thinner forest that I have, I think it is more adaptable for many of the birds that are valuable pest controls than is the very dense forest. You'll have a tree with about 5 or 6 different species nesting in it at the same time. So
they're your insecticide.
They're my insecticides, right on, because having a healthy bird population, I haven't had, that I know of, I haven't seen a budworm since 1939. I haven't seen a coneworm for well over 20 years. And conworms can be quite a disaster for your seeding, you see. But they just aren't present. And I know darn well it's not birds, you know,
Well,
because they work the area over. You see them; they're constantly working over it. Well, this is why having a multi-height, multi-age, multi-species forest is the answer to so many of our problems, because with that balance of tree forms comes the balance of bird life, insect life, fungal systems, microbes, bacteria, and the whole bit, eh? People always say, well, how do you fall a big tree in the forest without doing a lot of damage? Now, you're going to do some damage. You're going to do a little damage. There's no way out of it. But you can hold that damage to a minimum, and it's not hard to do. I've noticed here with the falling you've done on these long ones, you have done a very neat job of falling in falling them so that they pull straight out.
Yes. Well, that falling, the directional falling is a real important thing with small equipment. This is a 40-horse tractor, and there's only idling pulling this turn in. Once the turn is up, then I put the lock on, lift up my 3-point hitch, and I'm on my way.
You have a fender tree or a buffer tree. It's a poor one. It can be a high stump. It can be a boulder. Hey? When you're laying out your roads, you can do any one of 2 or 3 things. But this tree has taken the damage from about 5 or 6 loggings. And it's protected the young ones back here because of the swing of the logs. It prevents the log from going in and knocking the bark off that one. These are little tricks in the game to minimize your impact on the forest. We have a tree here that is commonly known as a wind throw, and the reason it is a wind throw is that it had faulty root system. You can have faulty root systems of various types, but this one happens to have one of the forms of root rot, quite common in our forest, but seldom, if ever, epidemic. And it's completely unnecessary to log a forest clean because of this. With this type of logging that Bob is showing us today, you can come in and you can take out these individual trees, either after they've blown down or before they blow down. And you get a complete salvage of what would normally become wood that would be waste in a larger type of operation. You can come in and do this, whereas it's completely uneconomic for a larger outfit to do it.
Yes.
The small operator with the type of equipment you're using, it means that you have that accessibility that you don't get with a big show. You get that 100% recovery from your tree.
I'm just showing them how little damage done here, Norm, with the tractor trailer.
He's getting cold, the little fella. He needs to warm up. Up we go. Ooh. This is my skidding equipment, Belgian draft horse, and a set of harness. It's quite simple. It's been around for a long, long time, but of course, as you can see, it still works today. And the collar is a very important piece of equipment. If the collar doesn't fit the horse properly, then he is not comfortable, just as if you had a pair of bad shoes on. By the end of the day, you could get sore and so on. So you've got to look after, make sure your collar's in good shape, and that things are adjusted properly for your horse. Set of harness like this is leather, but I've got some pieces on it that are nylon. So where it's touching the horse quite extensively, quite a bit, then you've got leather. But where it's not totally necessary, well, I've thrown the odd piece of nylon on here in the back stays and these little bits like this. The horse responds so beautifully just to commands. Once you've given the horse a command, you have encouraged his cooperation and confidence. It's just a matter of saying what you want, which is get up or whoa or what, yelling and screaming or hitting and everything like that. That's okay for the operator, but it doesn't do a damn thing for the horse. Spin him around. Come around, Dan. Attaboy. He doesn't talk back, but he has little ways of getting upset. Whoa.
Dependent on an oil company to keep him going.
No. Don't have to crawl under him at night and change the clutch. Come on, get up, Dan. Has to be cared for, housed properly, combed, brushed, and so on. My actual outlay, my expenses for this horse with hay and oats and vet and everything over the past 8 years have averaged about $2 a day. Yep. So it's quite simple once you're onto it. It like everything else, it requires a technique, an understanding, and patience sometimes too, just like a lot of things.
We're going to have to make fundamental changes in our thinking. I consider the forest as something that we can harvest from, but not destroy. But I hope that people will realize that they can have forests, they can have forestry, they can have industry, and they can have the inner satisfaction of knowing that they can extract from a forest and still maintain it. We do have to change our concepts that we have, that we can cut a forest and replant it after we've destroyed it. It just is not working. If you're with a forest for a long time, as I have been with this one, each tree has a character that has evolved and developed, even in the 45 years that I've known it. I've seen it grow up. Learning never stops. There's not a week goes by that I don't acquire some new little bit of knowledge about the forest I'm working with. I have changed my system and my thinking and the rhythm of cut and my expectations over the years. But it's always been changed with the idea of just harvesting what you can grow.